All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome everybody to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about building a business case for ITSM in the cloud. In a second I'm going to hand over to our presenters, but just firstly let me remind anyone listening, if you would like to post your questions for our presenters, you can do that at any time during the webinar and we'll come to those at the end and answer as many of them as we can. Okay, so I'm going to hand over now to our presenter. It should be David Wright, our Chief Value Officer at SDI. Hi David, are you there?
Hi Zoe, yeah, thank you very much indeed for that.
No problem.
And again, yeah, I'd like to, brilliant, thank you. And welcome everybody to today's webinar, as Zoe's mentioned, on the subject of building a business case for ITSM. My name is David Wright. I'm lucky enough to work for Service Desk Institute. I'll be hosting today, as Zoe's mentioned, and I'm really delighted to be joined by Neil Penny today, who's Product Director at Sunrise Software. Welcome, Neil.
Thanks very much, David.
Nice to have you with us, Neil, today. And it'd be really great if you could give us an overview of what you do at Sunrise, maybe your experience, and explain also what Sunrise does.
Yeah, sure, that'd be great. So Sunrise have been a provider of service management software since the mid-90s, when most of us were probably still calling it the help desk, and shipped software on disks and CD. But really since then we've evolved our solutions that embrace the internet and software as a service, and probably matured into more of a provider of a highly flexible IT service management platform, which allows us really to address everything ranging from sort of enterprise service management projects down to straightforward service desk implementations. And sometimes actually some of these solutions go far beyond what you might imagine probably initially. As for myself, I've got a long history with Sunrise that starts back in 1996. And despite taking about 5 years out to do other things, I returned in 2012 as Sunrise's product director. So I'm now responsible for setting Sunrise's product strategy and then working alongside the Sunrise development team, helping to make that a reality. So day to day, there's a lot of product management, a dash of product marketing, and a lot of talking to customers and other stakeholders. And documentation, of course. There's a lot of documentation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's pretty extensive, Neil. So an awful lot of experience, which is really cool. And I think, if I remember rightly, Sunrise was also the first ITSM tool vendor in conjunction with SDI to have the tools sort of approved for performance metrics on SDC V7, which is pretty cool. So congratulations on as well. That's a pretty cool thing to have in your arsenal, I think, as a service provider, a vendor provider.
Yeah, so,
no, it's really cool, mate. Really cool. Thank you for that. So, in conjunction with Sunrise, SDI recently undertook some research related to IT service management procurement, and it's designed to establish what real-life service desk professionals and IT service management practitioners think about cloud, SaaS, hybrid, and on-premise IT management solutions. So the research explores the process of securing funding, resources for an ITSM tool implementation, including procurement, the processes around that, or thoughts around that, thoughts on business continuity, disaster recovery, and data restoration. And I think as we go through this, before we start, as Zoe has said, if any of our listeners have got any questions that you'd like to ask, please use the panel option, and we'll get to those towards the end of today's webinar. So I think first off, Neil, I think certainly as a, I've come obviously from a service desk background as well, and now being this side with SDI and seeing the sort of vendor landscape, I think it's fair to say that the market for IT service management tools is probably more diverse than it's ever been, I think it's fair to say, and the different variants and variations and options open to IT service management tool buyers has developed significant over the last couple of years, or last few years, last 5, 6 years perhaps actually, as sort of cloud has had this impact. And I think the choices now of service style, service solution, and the type is pretty much infinite, I think, certainly for what I've seen. And obviously there are pros and cons with each of those various solutions and how that impacts on the selection of a tool and the business outcomes for an organization. That must make it a real challenging for buying organizations at the moment, Neil. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I think when we look at how the market's evolved, there are vendors at all stages of requirements, from entry to enterprise, and it's impossible, I think, for anybody out there looking for a tool to try and find a way of evaluating all of them. It takes a very targeted effort to sort of understand your particular requirements that you're trying to address, the challenges that you're looking to solve actually internally, and then to obviously do some research and really target your efforts to identify the right solution for you. It's very difficult out there, and as you say, there's a lot of different levels of product and a lot of different budgets coming at you from lots of different geographies, and it's fair that you need to evaluate those succinctly.
Yeah, very, very interesting actually at the moment, I think. And just to cover off again, I think, Neil, the statistics that the research offers listeners and anybody really who wants to sort of download it, those statistics and information can be included in a business case to support decision making. And I think the report is available from the Sunrise website. You can see that there. So it's sunrisesoftware.com. So yeah, I think that's available for everybody to download, which is brilliant. Okay, so we'll move on then. So initially, we wanted to open the research with an understanding of how organizations provision their current service management tool solutions. And this is the result. So 51% of the responding organizations have cloud, SaaS, or hybrid solutions, while 49% said they have on-premise solutions. Now, what do you think about that, Andy, initially? Are you surprised that that's so equal?
To be honest, not really. I think the result actually closely mimicked our own experience that we find when we've engaged with organizations over the last few years. We've seen a steady increase of companies willing to adopt SaaS over on-premise deployments, to the point where we do see it as pretty much a 50-50 split. And probably that's down to the fact that there's a lot of great examples out there of SaaS delivered solutions, so that many people really don't see it as a barrier anymore. They, in some ways, it's actually enabling them to onboard quicker and to evolve their solution faster.
Yeah, I think that certainly makes sense, doesn't it? And we'll see some more of that stuff as we go through. So next we asked organizations if they had plans, if there are any plans to move to a sort of SaaS model, a cloud model, and when. So 36% of respondents said they were looking to move to a SaaS model. And a total of 57% of those said they were moving to a SaaS model within the next 12 months. And within the next 2 years, 71% of those organizations are planning to move to a SaaS model. We also asked organizations the same question about moving to an on-premise model. And only 5% of respondents said they would be moving to an on-premise solution. And from a time perspective, they would have done that in the next year, the next 12 months. So if you take all that into account and based on the data with no organizational changes during that time, this is what we'd expect to see if we run this survey again in 2 years. So by 2019, 66% of organizations would be using SaaS solutions and 34% would be using on-premise solutions. So we can see a shift there of 15% over to SaaS solutions. So there must be a reason why these organizations are shifting to SaaS solutions, and we'll see some of those potentially play out in the following data as we go through the slides, no doubt. But first, how do you interpret that shift, Neil?
Well, I think as I mentioned, we're generally seeing quite a large shift as we go, and I think there's an ever-growing confidence that complex solutions such as those found around sort of IT service management, can be successfully delivered without limitation. Actually, I could probably go so far as there's obviously undeniable proof in many case studies available that that's the case as well. Many people have, I guess, grown up and are using a lot of SaaS applications in their own personal lives. You've got Google, email and calendars, to-do lists, online storage and backups, all your apps on mobile phones and things like that. It's becoming a lot more natural to work with software in this way. So I think it's kind of inevitable that we're seeing this kind of swing towards software as a service and cloud offerings over and above sort of on-premise. But as history tells us, though, technology tends to move in cycles. So we'll see how long this sort of takes to maybe change, or maybe for the swing to eventually stabilize.
Yeah, yeah, and I think we'll see a little bit of that shortly, I think. And that 5% shift from SaaS to on-premise is almost the other way, essentially. Do you expect to see that rise and fall, or rise or decrease over time? Is it literally a cyclical thing, or do you think that shift will change?
I actually think it's, it will probably reach a peak. When that will be, I don't really know. I mean, it's not something I've probably got any good data for.
Yeah.
What we definitely see is that even if the swing does eventually stabilize, a lot of SaaS software and its fact that it comes from OpEx budget lines, once they're established within an organization, they're usually maintainable. So this gives the buyer a lot more flexibility in changing suppliers rather than having to go back to the CFO and the CIO with another CapEx request. And having to answer the difficult questions as to why the last investment failed. So, it's there's a lot of wins actually involved in moving to something like cloud, or a SaaS or a hybrid kind of offering.
Yeah, cool. Some really interesting statistics there. The next data set covers the considerations, benefits, and challenges that organizations found when selecting and using the different solution variants. So we asked, what were the key considerations in selecting an on-premise solution versus cloud, SaaS, or hybrid? From an on-premise point of view, it's very clear there that security is the highest consideration, right, with 31% of respondents citing security as the main consideration, followed there, as you notice, by maintenance, development, and access to data. And from a cloud, SaaS, or hybrid point of view, the highest consideration is cost, with 33% respondents citing cost as the main consideration, followed again, interestingly there, by maintenance, development, and access to data. Again, some very interesting findings. So as we can see, both sets of considerations have maintenance, development, and access to data as high considerations. It's even more interesting to see that security is the highest on-premise consideration. So those organizations potentially see on-premise as a more secure option, or may have specific security needs that they need to meet as an organization. However, security is one of the lowest considerations for cloud, SaaS, and hybrid-based organizations. So those organizations either may perceive that cloud or SaaS solutions are as secure as on-premise solutions, or they don't have the same specific security requirements or needs. And likewise, the cost consideration is the highest cloud, SaaS, or hybrid consideration, and cost is the lowest consideration for the on-premise organization. So it's almost a mirrored outcome. And does that mean, for example, that on-premise organizations' budget isn't an issue as it directly relates to their security needs, for example? Yeah, so some really interesting stuff there. And again, Neil, do you think, or are cloud-based solutions as secure as on-premise solutions? Are we seeing here more of a preconception rather than actual?
I think we are, actually, to be honest. I mean, there's when we look at it, cloud-based solutions can be every bit as secure as the on-premise counterpart. I guess what you lose potentially on-premise is the fact that there's a perceived lack of control over the security aspects. Yeah. But for SaaS, it's the vendor rather than the customer that takes on the risks and the responsibility for getting it right. And that's a very real responsibility that vendors take. Getting it wrong is a very real threat to the quality of service and, of course, the reputation of the vendor to deliver that service. So, it's certainly very critical to get it right. But I actually do see that things are probably changing. I mean, we're seeing a lot of security teams getting involved in the review of particular solutions when we're engaging with organizations. So there's definitely some thoughts about how that might be tackled.
Yeah. And again, that access to data, I think certainly reading the reports and again, listening to some people, access to data is a big thing, yeah? What are your thoughts on that 21% for on-premise? Is access to data a concern for the modern cloud or SaaS service? If you're a buyer, is that a real concern? Or again, is that preconception?
I actually thought, when I saw the numbers, I actually thought this was quite low for both parties, actually, on-premise and cloud. I guess though these days, and maybe it's sort of reflects the fact that it's now accepted that data can be well protected. It can be made very secure, but still be very accessible. wherever it's located. So yeah, maybe there's just an element here that people are just fairly accepting of the fact that they have access to their data when they need it and where they need it. So you know, there's I guess the data is the one thing that a lot of SaaS vendors have been working with to protect for the longest period of time, I guess. So yeah, maybe this is just something that you know, people are taking for granted generally.
Yeah, I get your point on that one. And maybe the final question for me in this, and it relates to that sort of security and cost thing a little bit. Other than specific security policies or legislation, you know, that maybe can't be controlled, I suppose, from a buying potential or buying point, can organisations meet both those security and cost considerations on a single platform? It sounds as if that is doable. It is something that is absolutely achievable.
Yeah, I definitely expect it to be. I mean, I was, again, relatively surprised, I think, that security was as low as it was for the cloud SaaS and hybrid options here at 11%. You know, I think peace of mind for application security, data security, etc., will certainly be high on the agenda of someone within those organizations who responded here. Yeah, there are a lot of people responsible for data application and network security, but yeah, perhaps the 11% is more indicative of the respondents' maybe lack of visibility or responsibility for security concerns.
Yeah,
of course, as well as the kind of differing regulatory requirements that people have. I think our advice on this, on security, is to basically get other departments involved as early in the procurement cycle as possible, effectively, to try and establish trust in the solution that you're, or the solutions that you're looking to review. You know, failing to do that is ultimately going to cause you, you know, issues, potentially delays later on in the project. You know, inevitably, once you've spent a good deal of time already investigating, reviewing, discussing, and planning. So yeah, we would certainly want everybody to get kind of involved, and yeah, we're quite happy with that to you know, to actually share security and cost considerations, I think, as part of an overall customer solution.
Yeah, good. And you're right. I think, you know, there's almost a little bit of a sort of paradox, isn't there, about the understanding of one side to saying, yes, secure, haven't got any issues, but cost is an issue. And it's really interesting how that sort of mirrors and reflects. Okay, thank you for that. So the next question we asked relates to the benefits of on-premise versus cloud, SaaS, and hybrid. So from an on-premise point, a significant benefit identified is cost, again, at 49%. This could be related to the costs already incurred by these organizations and the cost relating to change to another solution, if they were to change. So the cost benefit of not changing a system, either that or they see on-premise as more of a cost-effective solution, full stop. Access to data and compliance are the next two. Again, highest benefits for these organizations at 15% each. And notably, flexibility and reliability is not seen as significant benefits, with only 5% each there, which is quite interesting too. From a cloud SaaS hybrid point, we see an almost equally significant benefit of reduced maintenance and development at 46% there. So that would be the internal support cost, time and effort. Flexibility and low costs are also seen as real benefits. Again, interested to see that on-premise organizations are not concerned with cost saving specifically, or the cost to change a solution are in some way prohibitive potentially. We can also see that alternative SaaS solutions are showing real efficiency and cost-saving benefits, which is again, I think you'd maybe expect to see, certainly from my take on things. Again, Neil, access to data as a benefit. What are your thoughts on that one? Again, I know that data keeps coming up as a point of reference. What are your thoughts on that accessibility?
It's clearly important to some. I mean, I think for those that have very real regulatory pressures and legislative, you know, positions to adopt, I think it's clear that looking after the data is going to be critical to them. I think most companies, you know, probably want that level of control that comes with having it on premise. Yeah, it's within their own private cloud. They're responsible for it. And maybe that's really where that comes from. I think yeah, there's for those who are sort of adopting a sort of a risk strategy, effectively, it may be that they're just less, you know, sort of happy to accept the risk to their underlying data.
Yeah, really interesting that. I mean, I certainly speak to organisations, and you do tend to get this quite, sort of, they're either ends of the scale. There's nobody in the middle that has a sort of varied sort of thought about the pros and cons between two. It's either usually, whoops, nah, can't do that, it's the data, or yep, can do that, it's absolutely cool, the data's fine and the cost is a benefit. So it is quite interesting. I think maybe that's to do with organisations maybe, looking at going to shows or engaging with the right organisations to really find out more about what these can offer, I think. And that flexibility, the difference in flexibility as a benefit. What type of flexibility does a SaaS solution, cloud solution, have over an on-premise solution?
I think quite often when we look and work with our customers, we don't certainly see that there should be any lack of flexibility, for example, between whether you choose on-premise or cloud. There are some significant benefits, though. Of course, the top one there is kind of perceived by reduction in internal maintenance and development. Of course, certainly something that you're not looking after the infrastructure that underpins the chosen solution. I mean, in some ways as well with SaaS, it provides a way of consuming, I think, some of the more complex applications out there, and making them a little bit more accessible, so that speed of onboarding can be certainly improved. And quite often, of course, you do get increased access. With all these applications being delivered over the internet, they're inherently available any time of day and night across multiple geographies, different devices, and that for some can be a real significant benefit.
Yeah, absolutely, especially if you've got a service that it spans the entirety of the globe of 24 hours. Yeah, absolutely. And I think certainly in my experience, I think certainly that flexibility thing is a big deal when you're delivering services. That you've got all your customers in place, you've got the contractual obligations in place, the SLAs, and anything that impacts on the ability to deliver that in an agile way is obviously going to be a drawback, I think. And both sets of data there, I think, Neil, suggest that on-premise, right, in a sort of perception point, is a cheaper option. Do you think that that's based on short-term or long-term impact of costs? And is it comparable? Is that the case? And also that's a big question, because there's various different costs involved from an organizational side and from a supplier side. But do you think that's fair?
I probably do. I mean, I think it's fair to say sometimes when cost with on-premise solutions is kind of thought about, that people tend to disregard to a certain extent the larger sunk cost that is already going on within the operation of the IT department, and that's maintaining the infrastructure on which the solution will be implemented. So, and having a kind of an understanding of that, I think will probably show ultimately that maybe the two solutions are particularly on a par. I think when you look at the cost for sort of on-premise, or against SaaS, there's typically no big outlay, of course, with SaaS, which for some customers, the lack of capital budget for a big investment is a bit of an issue. So managing cash flow on a month-to-month spend is more beneficial to them. I think the total cost of ownership on a SaaS solution, I think vendors in a lot of spaces have been talking for many years that the TCO is probably lower than on-premise, but I don't know. I think I'd like to see some better stats, I think, on that one. I think as a software vendor, though, we don't tend to make that play. I think our position is that if you like our software, then we'll give you the options. We don't mind if you've got a private cloud or an infrastructure available to you that you want to deploy this in. Equally so, we're more than happy to work on a solution within our own cloud and have that as a subscribe to as a software as a service. So we don't mind either way. We try to provide the kind of options available to them, really.
Yeah, cool. That's good. Thank you for that. So next we wanted to know, and we asked about the challenges that organizations were finding around both solutions and what they were offering organizations. So from an on-premise point, we see the very first cost-related challenge. It's the first time we've seen cost raise its head from an on-premise. And that's namely internal development, the costs around that, and that's 29%. And that's closely followed again by greater initial investment, so another cost at 24%. Customer Customization, upgrading and flexibility are also listed there. And obviously, many of those are real constraints for an organization when trying to be cost effective and become more agile as well. And on the cloud side, or cloud SaaS and hybrid side of things, the reliance on the vendor support, that's an interesting one. And customization constraints are seen as real challenges, as 29% each there. And notably, security is also in there as a challenge too. So Neil, yeah, again, we can see almost 60% of respondents see challenges with vendor reliance and the inability to customize cloud or SaaS solutions. Are cloud and SaaS platforms really more agile than on-premise solutions?
I think it's fair to say we've never really, personally, from Sunrise, we've never really seen the two as being very different. I think our experience is that we've been offering highly configurable applications for years.
Yeah.
Certainly well before the cloud revolution, and pre-cloud it was kind of no different. Some clients would be very self-reliant, some wouldn't with regards to customizing the application. And we don't see though cloud as being a barrier to the customization. This is something that we're very conscious to try and steer away from. What I would say, and certainly when you look at the on-premise side of things, is that the internalized development costs and the initial investment and the risk of over-customization and so on, you have to ensure that you have the right resources available to you internally to maintain in an ongoing way the application as your internal processes change and evolve and your business adapts as well. And that's something I think that a lot of organizations kind of fail to take heed of. As more and more complex processes are modeled within these service management tools, they require more and more work effectively to, I wouldn't say tame them necessarily, but to get the best out of the application itself. It has to change and adapt in the same way. We tend to try and take a pragmatic approach to that with our software, and to try and put as much of the tools available to you to do that customization yourselves. But as we've said, we tend to find that it's a bit of a split really between those that want us to do it, so those are happy to be reliant on the vendor as a kind of almost a white glove service, for example, to those that are actually happy taking on the administration and configuration and development costs actually internally themselves as well. Yeah. So I mean, I think the one thing that in a recent case study that we had with the customer, the biggest thing for them, and this is a SaaS customer, the biggest thing for them was that it was fully customizable, and that there was no customizations ever lost during upgrades and things like that. It was actually trying to make it as simple as possible for them to get the maximum benefit as they evolve and move forward with us as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think that makes an awful lot of sense. I think, and I think what would be great to have, if you have any, are the types or examples of the types of savings that cloud, SaaS, or hybrid solutions can offer organizations. But if you've got any statistics or data related to that?
And not to hand, I have to say. You probably caught me on the hop a little bit there.
Sorry. Certainly again, from when you come into an organisation like SDI and you watch organisations procure and buy and see the pros and cons depending on the organisation, you certainly see some of that reflected in their service. You mentioned the consistency of monthly payments as an example, and I think certainly talking to some organisations, that's an absolute real benefit. That's they know what that is in the month. They know that the cash flows is supporting some of that too, which is really cool. But I'm sure that if there is a business case situation, evaluating the cost sort of opportunities or cost saving opportunities would be a significant decision-making point, I think, for any organisation, if indeed that was something that was going to release costs or make the organisations more cost-effective. So yeah, that'd be great. If I'll see if I've got anything banded about. I remember doing something in my last organisation around some of that, and certainly the opportunity around SaaS was as not only as an enabler but as a cost-saving exercise was quite significant, to be honest. Next, okay, so we then asked what would make a difference to any decision making to hosting an ITSM tool on premise or using cloud SaaS or hybrid solutions. And as we can see there, security and legislation is the most significant decision making point for on-premise organizations at 31%, followed again by customization and flexibility, a key thing there. Interesting, again, to see cost as the lowest decision-making point for on-premise organizations. And from a SaaS side, the cost is by far the most significant decision-making point, with 41% by far, and security is again a lower decision point at 10%. I think it's becoming very clear, Neil, in this data that both groups have very different points of view related to costs and security. How would you address those points to influence on-premise organizations thinking on a cost-benefit situation if it's such a low priority point?
Well, I think looking at it's funny really, because when we look at the cost is very low for on-premise. I don't think we've probably ever been involved in a project where cost hasn't been someone's high priority at some point in the procurement cycle. It probably it has a lower point, but regardless as to whether SaaS or on-premise, certainly cost is in our experience important. To be honest, I think sometimes influencing an organization one way or another is often slightly unnecessary with regards to whether to choose on-premise or SaaS. A lot of the companies that we speak to, we tend to find that their views on this are already established, and this probably with regards to their overall technology strategy. So when we speak with customers within ITSM teams, they're usually tasked with implementing within this strategy that's been handed down to them. They're not normally asking us to necessarily make the case either way. So it's something that an organization has chosen to a large extent to say this is our IT strategy, to stay on premise, maybe with some outsource or maybe some cloud or software as a service offerings, or someone's actually taken a very conscious decision to definitely move more and more into a cloud or hybrid solution. So I think we tend to find that we're just addressing those solutions or addressing those requirements that come at us from particular customers. It's true that obviously there's regulatory and compliance issues that definitely drive the behaviour one way or another, and legislation clearly means that security is raised sooner rather than later, and it's probably only understandable, I suppose, that a lot of companies now are well versed on security impacts when you read about them almost daily on these outlets these days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, I think. And as part of this, some of the anecdotal comments that we had back showed that decisions were, as you rightly said, down to legislation rather than choice. In your experience, how much of that decision-making is due to the policies or legislation related to data storage, and how much is down to the confidence in the software or the security on the software in your experience?
I think it's a little bit of both, to be honest. I think it's heavily led by regulation, but I think what we're tending to find is a real sea change happening within organisations where security teams are much more heavily involved in the project sign-off process. So in order to really ensure that data, application, network security are all understood. I think the only thing I would say on that is that generally this happens near the end of the process. I think I probably mentioned this before. It would be far better for the smooth running of the entire acquisition process that happened a lot earlier in the thinking. But we have had examples right towards the end when IT are involved or the InfoSec teams get involved, and there's a lot of hoops to dance through. We usually get there in the end, though.
Yeah, very interesting actually. And as you rightly said, I've got a little question shortly about some of the stuff that we're seeing out there at the minute. And it's quite a again a sea change, isn't it, from the way that crime, if you want to call it crime, is utilising or attacking software and services. It's quite an odd time, difficult time to be working in IT support, I think, from that perspective, isn't it? The next set of slides relate to budget, funding, and procurement. And we initially wanted to know what challenges were encountered when securing budget and resources for a new ITSM tool. And the biggest challenge seen by our respondents is perhaps unsurprisingly related to budget restrictions and cost, with 32% of respondents citing that as a key challenge. That's followed by justification and lack of understanding at 30% each. Interestingly, only 9% of organizations cited resource restrictions as a challenge. So it looks like they've got, got resource to actually do some of this stuff. Justification and lack of understanding, Neil, they're potential areas to explore maybe. Both have the potential to influence budget constraints if the return investment can be proven. How would you look to address both those if you were a buyer?
Yeah, well, I think if we deal with the lack of understanding, I think first, I think we've probably seen, for as long as I can remember actually, there's kind of been a bit of a disconnect really between the IT department and what business expects from it. And, it's quite surprising that this continues, to be honest, due to the huge reliance that we all have on technology in our daily lives, and the underpinning technology that enables our businesses that we work for to be successful. And it's a difficult one to address. It's probably generational maybe, but it's kind of incumbent, I think, on a lot of the proactive IT leaders to help promote the actual value and the activities that the IT departments bring to the organization, and how it enables the success of the company and the growth of the business. How do you address this? Well, I think I'd certainly recommend being as open and as transparent as possible in everything that's done. From whether these are internal workshops on any projects where stakeholders and vendors can come together to iron out any major misunderstandings. There are a lot of things that probably can be done just in order to facilitate information flow, I think, between the two. But it would definitely be better if a lot of organisations had IT actually reporting in or actually on the board of these companies in the first place, in order to really highlight the role that they do in enabling the company to move forward.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And certainly, you're right. Certainly, a business case and some of the content of that should support it. But stakeholder management as well. We see a lot of organisations now who are looking to spread the word, if you like, through the organisation about best practice and sharing tools and technology in sort of enterprise service management stuff and shared service management. And you're right. I think there's such a disconnect between what the organisation thinks IT is delivering or what it can do, and understanding what it actually can add as a sort of strategic point or a benefit to the organisation. So I think you're absolutely right. That transparency is key, and certainly we encourage organisations to promote what they do and market what they do almost in an organisation, so people understand the benefits and value that they offer an organisation. And that lack of understanding, again, how would a tool supplier address that with a potential customer? How would you sort of lift the veil a little bit on what can be offered?
Well, I mean, we've tended to have workshops with the vendors, and a lot of the time when it comes to building an improved justification for the software, we've worked with companies that are taking those additional steps at involving other service management centres within their organisation, and that helps them to build a sort of better business case. It may not be something that they do initially. The focus primarily will probably be on the main stakeholders within the IT service desk, but certainly we're seeing a rollout of service management software into other areas such as finance, legal, marketing, facilities and cost, and external customer service requests. So widening the scope of the solution in the longer term, whilst probably focusing on the ITSM solution in the near term, certainly helps to kind of build a stronger business case and justification. I think it's pretty important that the analysis of these wins that a project may bring, they have to be well understood and articulated is probably the key thing. If a project has any chance of sign off, it has to be articulated to those who hold the purse strings and the budget's going up in a way in which they will actually understand. So that's something that's definitely a key message, I think, from this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, I think, there. Now, if you're keen-eyed, listeners, and yourself, Neil, actually, you'll notice that there are some responses missing there, and there they are. So 26% respondents said they didn't have any challenges in securing budget, which is pretty cool, actually. Organizations have got stuff to spend. So that's almost Pareto as well. It's almost 80-20. That was quite interesting, too. next then, we wanted to understand what measures are in place for disaster recovery, business continuity, and data restoration. Another key, thinking when looking at different types of service offerings. And here we see that 45% have proven measures, 45% of organizations have proven measures in place, with 20% relying on the vendor. And I think, Neil, with the potential issues like we've seen recently, so the WannaCry outbreak not so long back, the ransomware, and in fact, coincidentally, what we've seen over yesterday and today, another big hit, it's becoming more prominent, and understanding the work to recover from those types of attacks is really important too. Do you think that we'll see an increased adoption of cloud and SaaS solutions right across the board, not just in ITSM, just right across the board in an organization? Do you think that'll happen?
I think it's probably already happening in certain cases. If you look at certain industries, there's been a huge adoption already. So HR and construction collaboration software, which I have a bit of a background in, they've both seen significant investment in that kind of deployment. What I probably would say is that, with something like the security breaches that have been very high in public conscience over the course of the last few weeks, is that it sort of helps bring security to the really front of mind. It shines a light on both the vendor and the customer's responsibilities to maintain good security, disaster recovery processes, continuity, etc. And that has to be a good thing. So out of something quite bad comes hopefully something good. A more proactive stance on tackling this as an issue going forward.
Yeah.
A lot of organisations will have a variety of different ways of tackling that, to be honest.
Yeah. It's very interesting times, isn't it? Very interesting times, actually, when it comes into that type of stuff. And from a business continuity and disaster recovery sort of situation, what type of models do vendor organisations have in place to support that?
Well, I think there's a lot of different things that the vendors do. I mean, there's no one solution. There's a lot of things that we need to do that involve technology, obviously involve good management processes and good people. I would say certainly things like good patch management, as we've seen with WannaCry, would certainly go some way to helping alleviate the pressures there. Such things as subscriptions to vulnerability databases, making sure that your database backups are in place and tested, your hot, warm, cold standby sites are available in different geographies. There are a lot of things that can be done, and kind of rest assured, I would expect most vendors will be doing many of these things in order to maintain business continuity with the application. And if the worst comes to the worst, of course, having the plans in place to do a complete restoration of the service in a completely new data center. A lot of this is actually partly about technology, but also about the process and making sure that when tested, the process works.
Yeah, and that's absolutely key, isn't it? That's absolutely key. And I was thinking as you were talking there about what type of, if I was a buyer, right, and I needed to manage my senior management team, their expectations, articulate not only the value but the security aspects and recovery aspects of service. Do you sort of offer that to stakeholders? Are you able to show them your not only your processes but actually how a DR or service continuity process would work in the effect of a disaster recovery situation?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we go through on a regular basis, actually. I mean, even from simple things like having the customer visitors and go on sites to visit the data center where their application is going to be hosted. We're quite happy with that, for them to then quiz the people who work in that data center, or to discuss with us exactly what the processes are. That would kick in the event of either a minor service outage or a major problem that where we'd probably have to all dig in. But there's a lot of different things that we can do really to make sure that a potential customer has the peace of mind that they need effectively to sign on the dotted line with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we know, I mean, from a service provider's perspective, customers hate downtime, and degraded services are bad. These kind of things have an incredibly detrimental effect on your reputation. So it's, it's in our own interests to mitigate this as much as is humanly possible.
Yeah.
And everybody, I guess, when it comes to the different disaster recovery techniques, of course, it's just a matter of cost. Quite often as well. The hotter you want it, the more cost is involved in it.
Yeah, thank you for that. And finally, in this sort of section, I suppose, we wanted to know how much more about how people secured funding for resources. And as you can see there, 59% of respondents said they did that using a business case, simply using a business case. Are there any tips that you have, Neil, in relation to creating business cases? Now, what we've covered off in this webinar so far are some clear points around buying experiences and what people think. And obviously those can be used to back up any thinking in a business plan. Are there any other points that you think we should raise to support a business plan and hopefully secure investment for a new tool?
Yeah, I think the big one, I kind of talked about it very briefly in an answer before, but I was taught many years ago to know your audience, and maybe a little trite, but you have to sort of focus on the narrative for the justification on the business upsides, not the IT upsides. It comes down to using the language that people will understand. And so we'll always find that IT is full of acronyms, and for the casual reader, it's a bit of a minefield of misunderstanding in the first place. A lot of assumptions can certainly take place, and so know your audience and generally use plain English when it comes to writing your business justification. I think it's critical to be able to explain what you're trying to achieve and how you intend to achieve it. And this is probably the product manager in me, if you see what I mean, in the fact that you need to understand your requirements, your functional requirements, which everybody is very focused on normally, and your kind of non-functional requirements. But what I would say is that quite often, buying a new tool alone is not going to deliver all of the outcomes outlined in a typical business case anyway. It's probably worth looking at why the incumbent toolset failed if it did. Quite often a little honest reflection can go a long way in achieving some success, I think, next time around. It's not often, but we have seen teams buy the product and then lose interest straight away, effectively, as they kind of move on to new initiatives. And these projects really aren't going to deliver the business case outcomes that have been agreed, sort of documented and agreed. And so it's about following through, I think, on the project and actually investing in its success that is actually pretty critical.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. There are, it depends on the questions we get, I think, but there are a number of sort of headline areas I think to concentrate on in a business case that you just mentioned, actually, and maybe we'll cover off some of those depending on the questions that we get. Okay, well, thank you for that.
The only thing I probably would also say is obviously don't just look at the upsides. Let's not just concentrate on the wins. Let's understand what the lack of investment would look like as well. There's got to be a challenge that is actually being addressed. You have to have a problem that you're trying to solve, and understand what it looks like if you solve it and what it looks like if you don't. That can quite often be the compelling event, and at least help sharpen minds on what is important.
Yeah, totally agree. And there's an absolute cost, isn't there, about not moving forward, not progressing. Staying still is going backwards, essentially. So thank you for that. Now, I'm hoping then, Zoe, we've got some questions from the audience. Again, guys, if you have any questions, by all means, post them, and we'll answer them as we go along. Any questions, Zoe?
Hi, so I've got a couple here already, and as Dave says, get any other questions, get those in the next couple of minutes. We've got about 5 minutes left. So the first one I've got here is, do you think the cost of SaaS will come down further over time?
That's a good question.
I think potentially yes, as the services underpinning applications become more consumerized, I guess. There is still, when it comes to hosting applications, there is obviously a lot of cost involved in running the infrastructure, buying the licenses for the software that underpin your solution and so on. So there's a lot of cost in there that that can certainly be ironed out over time. I think there's probably management costs that can be removed at certain points as well. So I think potentially, but I don't necessarily think that'll be across the board. Sometimes price is not really dictated by the cost of manufacturing something, as we probably all know from the iPhone. So there's always going to be premium price points for certain software, I think.
Do I think, Neil, again, I've been watching recently how technology is developing and how automation, how virtual assistants, how service bots are changing the way that we provision support. And I think certainly from my perspective, it's the more that a tool can do, the more inclusive a tool is in providing opportunities for an organization to reduce costs or become more efficient is an offset of any potential cost of license. So if you can prove in an organization that the tool is effectively changing the way your management model, whatever you want to call it, which is impacting on the way that you deliver the service from a cost perspective, it sort of gives an opposing upside. Yeah, do you get that?
Very much so. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there are huge barriers to the old ways of doing things with on-premise installations that make the products less accessible to certain organizations. So SaaS is definitely allowing people to subscribe and manage their subscription over time, I think.
Yeah, cool.
So the next one then, if I can, is about so earlier on, I think you were talking about how people deal with security and backup and things like that, and some people indicated that their vendor takes care of that, and then others said that there were certain things they do as well. So the question is, should responsibilities, the split of responsibilities between the client and the vendor, be set out at the beginning, like in a formal agreement or anything like that?
Yeah, typically, I think there may be some kind of agreements. I mean, we're responsible for an overall quality of service that we sign up to with each customer that comes on board. There are a fair usage I guess we don't. It's not something we necessarily have to sort of employ, but there potentially could be. So we take a lot of actions again with our applications and maintain the fact that no one can upload attachments, for example, that could potentially be used to execute scripts. We harden our application, of course, so that it becomes less vulnerable to sort of external attacks and things like that. There's a lot of things that we can do that kind of make sure that the application is, of course, as ring-fenced as it possibly can be. And actually, largely for the customer, all of that is totally transparent. So whilst there is a certain aspect of that might be true, I don't think it's something that we've necessarily had to work with any of our customers so far. I think in the past, we've definitely seen people, certainly in the industry, seen companies that expose their APIs over the internet, for example, and they can get flooded with requests that can obviously slow systems down and things like that. That can all be sort of taken care of through throttling and so on as well. So there's various mitigation techniques that we can do to maintain a good quality of service, so that actually this doesn't really become necessarily a shared problem.
And I think I'd probably assume, Neil, because I've never recently been in a buying situation, that sort of service would be outlined. There would be obviously the contracts around that. There would be the offering itself and what the capability is. And as you said earlier, each organization is going to have its own specific needs, and that may mean they need to select their own specific software vendor to meet those needs. So each service may be different. Yeah, is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's completely right. So at the end of once the decision has been made and you've become the chosen supplier for a particular customer, then that's when the contract negotiations start. That's where we have to agree what the service is that we're actually providing them for, and what does that look like, and what are the service levels that will be in place, etc. And this is all something that we have a base level that we start with, and sometimes that's more than enough for everybody. And quite often, I say it's more than enough for everybody. But occasionally, you have some particular requirements that you need to negotiate with the customer, and that's something that we're more than happy to work with them on. For us, we want someone to be comfortable, knowing that their application is available, it's protected, their data is secure, and their users can access it whenever they need to.
Good, thank you. Any more, Zoe? I think probably got time for one more, probably.
One more, yeah. If we're quick, we'll get that one last question in, and really, actually, it's to do with resources. How is there anything else that you can advise where to go to get more information or to get some support with passing that on? You're talking about making a business case, things like that. So I guess you could say a little bit about what SDI and any other kind of industry resources has to offer.
Yeah. Well, certainly, I think a good place to start is to look around. We know there's an awful lot of stuff out there. Sunrise has got a great website. They've got some of that information that we discussed and this report online as well. Certainly from an SDI perspective, Zoe, it's fair to say that we offer services to support selection. We do a fantastic software showcase, which I think the next one is in Manchester on the 19th of July. So if anybody's available then to go along, it's a brilliant day of really understanding what the potential options are out there. I think Sunrise is going to be there as well, which is brilliant. So yeah, I think there are many opportunities, many options. I think it is about engaging with people, trying to find out a little bit more of the approaches to look at, the avenues to look at, rather than trying to do it yourself. Because I tell you what, I've been there, it's a minefield. So I think engaging with the experts is absolute key.
Great. Okay, excellent. And what I'll do, this session's obviously been recorded, so everybody will get the link to that afterwards as well. And what I'll do is just include a link to our event and any bits and pieces that could be useful in there. So thank you both very much for that today. Really full session, really almost up to the hour, so that's brilliant. Thanks, Dave, for hosting today.
No, thank you, Zoe. It's been really good to chat and listen. Neil, thank you for that. I think there's some really interesting data which you've got on the website that we can share. So thank you to join us today, Neil. Thank you, Zoe, for managing today's webinar as well. Also like to thank Scarlett from SDI for providing the data for the webinar too. So yeah, that's about it. I think that wraps everything up, guys. So thank you as well to our listeners. I hope you got a lot out of that. We'll see you next time, guys, and thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.